Good evening, and welcome to the Death Cafe, wherever you're logging in from. I'm so honored to be here with you tonight, and very thrilled you're here to talk about a subject we usually don't talk about. When you come on, send me a text in the chat box and let me know where you're from, and we'll get started really soon. Tonight's about you. Death Cafe is a beautiful opportunity for you to have your voice, ask your questions, your concerns, and hopefully feel supported. But before we start, I don't know what your day has been like. How about we take just a minute to ground and come together as a community? So if it feels right for you, go ahead and close your eyes and bring your attention or your awareing to your breath, and allow your breath to breathe you. Allow yourself to drop into your body. Make a connection somehow between your feet, your legs, your back. Feel what you're sitting or standing on or lying upon. Allow your inhaled breath to lift you and your exhaled breath to let go. Letting go of anything that you're needing to at this moment in time. Any holding, any control, any tension, or any pain. Allow your exhalation to take you deeper than before. Create a gentle and accepting, non-judgmental, and grateful atmosphere for yourself. May you stay open to the roots of the unexamined assumptions and beliefs, remaining open to all possibilities. May you and all beings feel safe. May you and all beings be connected, mind, body, and spirit, within grace. May you and all beings feel loved, and may you and all beings remember that you are love and light. With love from my heart to yours. Let me know where you are in the world. I'm in Northern California in a sweet little mountain community called Nevada City, and we've been surrounded by fires for weeks. I'm safe and also very conscious of those around me. So sending out heart prayers for those that are suffering and those that are having to flee from fires, and may all beings be safe there. I want to talk about the Death Cafe. What is it? You know, the Death Cafe, and there's something called Death Over Dinner, the Coffin Club, they were all birthed out of the death awareness movement. The Death Cafe identifies both a movement and an individual gathering that occur as part of the movement. This movement began in Switzerland by Bernard Krietz, who held his first Café Mortel in March of 2004. Later, a British web designer, John Underwood, hosted a cafe gathering in his home in September of 2011. And he went on to establish a website for the movement, which is deathcafe.com. The overall objective of the cafe is to gather together to increase an awareness of death with a view of helping people make the most of their finite lives. The Death Cafe was brought to the United States in 2012 by two women, Lizzie Miles and Maria Johnson. Death Cafe events are intended to offer a nonprofit basis, accessible, respectful, and confidential space, which I sure hope you feel tonight, with no intention of leading people to any conclusions, product, or course of action. And if we were together, I would serve you refreshments and always a little chocolate, because I think death by chocolate is kind of special. So if you haven't already, pour yourself a cup of tea or something. As of this week, There's over 12,960 Death Cafe gatherings around the world in 81 countries. So we're not alone here. It really is a movement, and it really is a place to come together, to have conversations, ask our questions, our concerns, and hopefully feel supported. We don't talk about death too much. So I don't know what brings you here tonight, and I hope I find out. But people choose to come to the Death Cafe for so many different reasons. But it's really worth noting that the cafe's movement is risen kind of spontaneously, appearing to meet a need, a felt need, and demonstrate that at least some people in our society and elsewhere in the world are willing and able to talk openly about death-related subjects. And personally, I believe live more fully. When we coil from our fears, we tend to feel heavy, depressed, and maybe hold on to anxieties. When we move towards them safely with support, we can really work through them and enliven ourselves. I want you to know that tonight isn't intended to be a grief support. There's not going to be a lecture. It's not really an educational session, although we always learn, me included. And it's not an avenue to promote business or cause. Communication about end-of-life issues is key to understanding ourselves, to understanding this world we live in, and help us make rational decisions that bring meaning to our life. We can't magically make death disappear, although we try, from our lives, nor can we completely erase the sadness and other forms of distress that are associated with death-related issues. However, we can talk about death. We can share insights and attitudes, learn from each other, and strive together to cope more effectively with dying, death, and bereavement. So again, I want to welcome you all to the Death Cafe. Do me a favor, if you're online already and you're checking in, send us a little chat. Let us know, and let me know specifically where you're from, and specifically what brought you here tonight. What questions do you have? What concerns do you have? How would you feel supported tonight? This is what Death Cafe is all about. It's not about me talking. And if I might, let me spend a moment to introduce myself, just in case there's new people online. My name is Dr. Andrea Dearhart, and I have the profound honor of founding a nonprofit organization called The Heart Way, Embracing Life and Honoring Death. And we are a nonprofit organization that focuses on supporting people before, during, and after death by providing advocacy, counseling, education, community programs such as the Death Cafe, and ministry supporting people with end-of-life care and rituals. I happen to be a psychologist, a mythologist, and an end-of-life practitioner, which is inclusive of death doula type skills. I've served for the last 35 years, and every day I still grow, and every day I have so much to learn. As you know, we can't put death in a little box. We all die, we carry that together, and yet it's very different for each of us. We have different mind, bodies, and spirit. And what we need to support ourselves at the end of life is crucial. So thank you for joining us tonight. And it is such an honor to be here. So let me hear from you. What brought you here to the cafe? What concerns do you have? And what's on your mind? I have something that I would like to share in the meantime, but please chime in and send us what you're interested in and what's on your mind. So I run across this a lot in my work, wondering what your thoughts are as well. Sometimes we end up caring for someone in our lives, a parent, a partner, a loved one, even a friend, that may have memory challenges, may have lost their ability to make their healthcare decisions for ourselves. And as many of you know, there's a legal document called Advanced Directives that in many states, sometimes you might hear it as a living will. It's the document where we share what our wishes are at the end of life. We share how we would like to be cared for. This is an advanced directive for healthcare. There's an advanced directive for finances, and that's really different. I'm real interested in talking about the advanced directive for healthcare and some of the questions that arise for caring for someone at the end of life. So working with beautiful clients, there often comes an existential crisis and a moral dilemma. So I like, if I might, just to share a story of a client that didn't have the capacity to make decisions for himself at the end of life. He didn't have the cognitive ability. He had cognitive issues that were deteriorating due to a disease process. And he stopped eating and drinking. And his family members didn't want him to stop eating and drinking. They weren't quite ready to let him go. And they were actually very scared. Well, what if we don't feed him? And what if we don't give him water? Will we be liable? Would I go to jail for that? It's not an uncommon concern. The laws are pretty clear, and yet there are opportunities in the laws that are vague. But here's basically what's important. Number one, in the scenario I'm sharing with you, the family first had to come to terms that he was at the end of his life and that he wanted to die. Signs and symptoms were there. His body was failing to thrive. But it was very difficult for this family to see him not eat and drink. So for a while, they were force feeding him. He wasn't taking his pills either, which exacerbated his mental conditions. It was so hard for the family. They actually spent days walking him down the halls, up and down, because he had so much energy to release, and he wasn't of this consciousness. There's a state of life between life and death at the end of life where consciousness shifts. Many traditions speak about it. We're not living this life that you and I are living, and we haven't transitioned beyond. Oh, but our world starts to shrink. We're not interested in worldly things anymore. We're not interested in what's on the news. We start to do our life review. We start to dream more vividly and lucidly. We start to see loved ones that have died or moved on. Some are in dreams, some might be visions, some might be hallucinations, and doesn't matter. So back to this family, I had the honor of meeting with them. And first of all, the most important thing was helping them get him comfortable, because he was not comfortable. He didn't have physical pain, but he had a lot of existential, a lot of emotional difficulties. He ended up being hospitalized to get support because the family had no medication to give him to keep him comfortable, because he wasn't taking anything by mouth. So there's a medicine that can be administered sublingually under the tongue, as well as injected, as well as patches, which are all viable options when somebody can't swallow. And that's often the situation at the end of life. So he became hospitalized, he came home, and he still was uncomfortable and still wasn't medicated, and went on hospice care. And hospice was able to get the proper medications to start helping him be comfortable. So as he started to feel a little bit more comfortable, we met with the family and we processed this fear of his death and who makes that decision on when they can die and when they can't. Because he was not in his sound cognitive mind. So how do I define that? He wasn't speaking clearly, couldn't understand him. He wasn't connected to time, space, person, and he seemed to be in another world. Yet his disease processes were saying he was at the end of his life. So the family had to grapple with moral dilemmas. They were a Christian family, and they had to decide what was God's will and what is in the best interest. The family's number one interest was his comfort. So they were able to find their way into allowing him to let his life die naturally. And he did. And he died peacefully. But not without a lot of struggle for the family and a lot of struggle for him. Sometimes that struggle, I believe often, that struggle leads to our peace. We work through the emotional, the existential, the life regrets. He even had one lucid moment and was able to share with his loved ones that he loved them. So it was a beautiful healing opportunity. But the question or the dilemma is, how do we make that decision for another person when it's time to die? And do we really know? I can't answer that, but I think it's a very important question. I found that situation at hand with my sister. I tell this story quite often of my sister who had end-stage breast cancer. And she ended up having innumerable mets to the brain. And her oncologist wanted to do full brain radiation. So a little scary of a thought for me. And the MRI said innumerable mets, which means there were so many brain metastases from the original cancer that they couldn't count them. And I can't imagine how full brain radiation would help, but hurt her. So when I spoke to the oncologist, she said, this is what we'd like to do. And I said, okay. I was a durable power of attorney for my sister at that point because she was not able to speak for herself. She had regressed to personality of a small child. The blessing is she was very happy and she was very calm. So I didn't have any worries of that type of struggle for her, but she wasn't able to make sound medical decisions for sure. So the only reason why I said yes was because I knew she would have wanted that. She had the attitude of fire. She had the attitude of fight. She had the attitude of, I'm going to kick cancer's ass. Excuse the language. That was her. That was my sissy. So I felt it was what she would have wanted. So we tried the brain radiation and it failed. She ended up declining further, became incontinent, wasn't able to feed herself or drink. I ended up 911ing her. She ended up having a raging urinary tract infection, and they treated her. And when I talked to the oncologist on the phone about her having the treatment, I said, is it a good time for us to talk about palliative care and hospice care? And she said, no. Don't get way ahead of yourself. My sister died 3 weeks later from that conversation with her doctor. 3 weeks later. Back to the time in the hospital, an oncologist came in and she saw my sister and she did a assessment, a neuro assessment. And the first question in a neuro assessment is, who am I? She wasn't able to identify the doctor. And the second question is usually who the president of the United States was. She wasn't able to do that, but she knew who it was. I think she was kind of locked in. And a locked-in syndrome is you can't communicate with the actual world, but you're connecting to different things and you're understanding certain things. Like she knew who I was, but she couldn't say who I was. She did say, I love her, love me. And that warmed my heart. So the oncologist sat down with me and said, okay, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, and we can do this. And I looked at her and I said, it's time to let go. I knew the brain radiation wouldn't help her at this point, and she was declining. I wanted to bring her home. I wanted to love her. I wanted her to be with her 2 young children. And the oncologist burst into tears. And I went, okay, now we're both in the heart and we can talk about this. And let her know she gave my sister 10 beautiful years. But it's time to let go. This quality of life isn't something my sister would have enjoyed. She didn't have any opportunity to interact with the world that she loved. And she loved life and she was full of life. So I said to her, you have an incredible opportunity. I couldn't help myself. You have an incredible opportunity as a doctor working with patients that are terminal. And she did not do this with my sister. And we ran into a whole bunch of other complications because of it. They said, you have an opportunity of holding hope and the reality of life and death in the same hands together. If you're able to share with your patients that they have a terminal illness and that they will die from this disease process, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, or we may not know, they have an opportunity to live life to the fullest. I asked you this question. If you knew you were going to die, what would you do now? How would your life change? Or would it? For most of us, our life would change. For most of us, our life would inspire. We'd do those things that we put off, wouldn't we? We'd do those things that we put off. We might go on more trips. We might write that book. We might heal with someone that we had a severed relationship with. We might love more. We might work less. The list goes on. So I said to this oncologist that in this opportunity, your patients might just do all the things I mentioned, might take trips, might get a chance to put their end-of-life documents in place so they can care for their loved ones even after they die, might be able to say goodbye, might be able to love more, might be able to start a nonprofit that heals so many. And when we're living life to our fullest, you know what happens to the immune system? It goes up. It gets stronger. The empirical evidence is there for it. So I said to her, I said, not only can your patients live to their fullest ability, but their immune system will be stronger and your drugs will work better. They'll probably live longer. So it's an interesting web. We headed out the door. I went to go say goodbye to her. I was staying in the hospital with my sister. It was pre-COVID. And she grabbed me and gave me a big, beautiful hug with tears in her eyes and said, thank you. I came here to support you and I leave with a great gift. I was just so thrilled and hoping that she might have more of those conversations with her patients. And hence that brings us to the Death Cafe, having the conversation, the things that are on our mind and the things that we're concerned about to support us. If you just checked in, please let us know where you're from, sign in on the chat, and what's on your mind, what brings you here, any questions or comments about the story I just shared. So the point of sharing that story was we often will find ourselves in these conundrums, caring for someone, making decisions, life and death decisions for someone. How do we do that? What's the right way to do that? Is there a right way to do that? We have a whole bunch of legal documents that we can create, and they're real important because they communicate our voice to our family members, to the state, to the powers that be, to the doctors, so that they can support us. But we also have an opportunity to have these conversations with our loved one. There's a zillion, yes, a zillion and one scenarios that can happen at the end of life. What ifs? We'll never cover them all. However, it's worth having the conversations, discussing with your loved ones, discussing with your doctors what your wishes are. They'll remember that, putting it in your advanced directives so that you can have the best opportunity to be loved through. And the next most vital component is to find somebody that you completely trust, that has your best interest. My sister didn't have many things written down. Her doctor didn't tell her she was dying, and she was the last several months of her life. Didn't tell her she had a terminal illness. It was always the cancer that they had drugs for, so she could live for years and years. And she did live, but she did die. And she had none of her will, none of her end-of-life documents in place except the durable power of attorney, because I had been that for her all her life and had gone to the hospital and supported her through all the surgeries. So I knew what her wishes were as far as medically. That brought me so much comfort. It brought me a comfort that I believed I was following her wishes. And that's one of the greatest feelings in the world. I wasn't having to guess. I wasn't having to pretend. I felt really confident in supporting her in her medical choices. I wish that for everyone, to find that person that you trust. It doesn't have to be family. It can be family, but it doesn't have to be family. Just someone that you trust to make the decisions in difficult times, that knows you, that has your back, that'll follow your wishes under the most severe distress. Sometimes it's better if it's not family, so family can be there for you in other ways, and it's perfectly fine. I was the durable power of attorney for my sister and my mom, and having the experience that I have 35 years has, thank goodness, helped prepare me to be present for them. So find that loved one. There's all kinds of wonderful information, by the way, on the Heartway website about advanced directives and support and resources. So feel free, if you need some additional support, to go to heartway.org and see if there's anything that can serve you. And you can check in with us if you have any other questions. So, any questions, any comments? This is really for you. I can share all kinds of information, but I'd rather support you and your questions or your concerns. Anything related to death, dying, and beyond. My tea. Another topic comes up for me that might be of an interest is now during COVID, we have a new surge with the Delta, and less people are dying, thank goodness, but the hospitals have closed down again. And we're separated once again from our loved ones. We're separated again, not able to go into the hospital under rare conditions to support our loved ones. So they're alone. And I say alone, but I just really bow to our frontline responders, to our nurses, to our doctors. Really, really do an exquisite job of supporting and loving them through. And they're not family, and they're not our loves. How do we deal with that grief? How do we deal with that loss? As I know you know, we've been dealing with it for over a year and a half now. And that grief compounds. It's a form of grief. And that grief has to be processed. And it's very, very important. There's nothing to replace touch. There's nothing to replace that physical hug. There's nothing to replace being present with someone. And we continue to be blessed with other resources and technology to try and get connections. So one of the ways, and I want to, hi Roxanne, I will take a peek at your inquiry in just a second. I'll be right there. I just want to finish my thought on COVID and being separated from our loved ones. Like I was saying, it's not quite the same, but there's so many ways we can reach out. We've got FaceTime, we've got Zoom, we've got the ability to be in video chats, and many hospitals, especially in the ICU, are supplying their loved ones with iPads. I just had a dear friend end up in the hospital with a brain bleed. She's okay. And they gave her an iPad and she was able to communicate with her loved ones. I can't even tell you what a blessing that was. Really took a lot of my tension and imagination kind of got subdued because I was able to hear her voice. I was able to see her and know that she was okay. That meant everything to me. So we have the ability to connect technology-wise. We have the ability to write those love letters and making connection, letting them know how much we love them, getting those letters delivered to them, and finding the support that we need. When we're separated, there's grief. We're separated, there's grief. But we have a lot of tools to support us. We have the technology. We have the ability to write letters and express our feelings. We have the ability to connect with friends. And thank goodness we have the ability to support people. One of the challenges, an overwhelming amount of grief this last year and a half with losing loved ones and friends, on top of the other natural catastrophes, it's just a saturation right now. We're fatigued. We're emotionally fatigued. What can we do? Bring in your practices. Some I've shared, meditation. If you haven't tried Yoga Nidra, it's a beautiful practice to help with depression and anxiety and pain. You basically are guided through a journey, and Yoga Nidra helps to shift consciousness and get us in a relaxed state of being, even more relaxed than sleep. If you want to learn more about it, I'm doing a Yoga Nidra session tomorrow morning at 10. If you want to know more, we'll put the information in the chat section for you. So please take care of yourself during these times. Reach out. I know we're isolated in many ways, and we have more movement since we've learned so much about COVID. Find your sources to talk to, find a source to be loved, and find a source to give love. So thank you. Hi, Roxanne. I'm glad you're here too. I'm going to read what you wrote. I've been blessed to be able to be available to the more energetic support needs of quite a few people through a variety of transition needs over the years. However, recent deaths have required my putting more attention on the details you are describing. This added to making it much harder to really make it a priority to be present for myself, to even know what that looks like. What I'm most interested in now is how to make space for the various grief that has not been. Beautiful. Roxanne, are you talking about the grief for yourself or grief for others? I will speak to both. And if you want to give me some more feedback so I can make sure I answer your question, that would be wonderful. So how do you make space for yourself? What's so interesting is when we are taking care of the business of end of life, the documents, the physical caring for someone, the practicality of organizing care, making sure you have supplies and medications, food, and getting some rest for yourself. And there's a lot of energy putting a plan in place. I might call that a death plan, where we're anticipating the needs, putting a care plan with hospice, scheduling for the nurse, the social worker, engaging an end-of-life practitioner or a death doula. Maybe you are one of those as well. How does that take away from your words? Let me read this really quickly. Being present for yourself and for your clients or loved ones. You know, it's a brain issue, left-right brain issues, right? When you're working with the left brain and you're doing documents or you're planning things, we shift in and out of the left brain and the right brain. And I think the way that I have over the years created the space for myself is, number one, is grace, is knowing that I might not be able to do both at the same time. In fact, it's very difficult to do both at the same time. So when caring for loved ones, for example, taking care of the business and the material essence of life, I would just allow myself to dive into it. The other thing that I would do before I entered a task or a meeting is I would pause, I would stop, and I would breathe. Very similar to how we did at the beginning of the Death Cafe. And allow myself to drop in, to drop out of my head into my heart so that they can communicate with each other and I can serve with both. So basically it takes a pause, it takes a breath, and it takes a time. I often hold my breath when I'm doing task-oriented things, especially if they're fast and furious. So one of the ways I continue to make that space for myself is also my practices, is to create mantras to bring me into my heart, to do yoga nidra, and to realize that I have to step back to be able, and step in, to be able to come into my heart, especially when I'm caring for someone. When we're carrying the energetic, as you used, for others, it can become overload. And if we haven't taken care of ourselves, as mundane as eating well, sleeping, exercising, walks, then we can't properly hold the energy for others. There's an expression you all have heard called compassion fatigue. And I want to challenge that there's no such thing as compassion fatigue. Because if we were truly in compassion, we wouldn't fatigue. Because compassion doesn't take on the weight of the energy. Compassion has boundaries. And we have to learn what those boundaries are. If we don't, we absolutely fatigue and we can't hold that sacred space. We can't separate ourselves from others. It's a very challenging thing to do because we're taught in our culture, in Western culture, that the more you do for others, the more you give up of yourself, the better person you are. It's kind of interesting. The definition of caregiver is giving up self. Well, if we give up too much self and more self and more self, we're left with our shell. And there's just no way that we can hold that space. There's no way that we can stand in love and compassion and support someone through, whether it's energetically, whether it's physically, whether it's emotionally, whether it's spiritually. So you also asked about how to hold a space for various grief that maybe has not been met. One of the things that I notice for myself, as well as clients that I work with, there's a lot of business caring for someone at the end of life and then after someone dies. What we would notoriously don't do, whether it's in grief or any time in our life, is we often don't allow ourselves to feel. We put in place obstacles, distractions, stuff, move aside so we can take care of business. And then all those emotions, the various griefs, go into the pressure cooker. I say we have a pressure cooker that all the unfelt emotions go into: anger, sadness, grief, frustration, sadness, heaviness. All goes in the pressure cooker. And we all know what used to happen to the pressure cookers in ancient times when they got so hot, they exploded. And always when we least expect or least desire. So the business of end of life and the business and practicality after life often postpones grief, often stretches it out, often creates a unique, unstable experience of grief. And that is all fine. It's to become aware of it, awake and aware, that helps us move through it. So how to make the space for those various griefs that has not been is those practices, is creating space, whether it's in a support group, whether it's journaling, whether it's in nature, whether it's in meditation, whether it's doing a yoga nidra practice, whether it's talking to a dear friend. Time and tears heal. Not just time and not just tears. We need both to heal. People often ask, okay, my mom's not over her grief yet, and it's been a few weeks or a few months or a couple years. Grief doesn't end, it just changes faces. It changes its experience, it changes its weight, it changes its impact. It's always a teacher. Grief takes us deeper within. If you think of everything as grist for the mill in this life, grief is one of those great teachers. Grief is one of the many, many facets of love. If you love, you grieve. One of the things people observe about grief is the depth of their love reflects in the depth of their grief. But to not love at all, a life without love, not a life I want to choose. So it's one of the many facets of love and a great, great teacher to our depth, to our expansion, to our evolution. Just like death inspires life, grief teaches us about life and brings meaning to our life. It never has a time frame, and it often takes our breath away. Partly, we don't have a lot of practice at experiencing our emotions. We have all those distractions I talked about. It's very painful to experience our grief, our emotions. But if we don't, they don't go away. They go in and create dis-ease in the body of some type, physical, emotional, or spiritual. The great, great ancient traditions, religious, spiritual, teach us this. They teach us practices to help us stay connected and help us stay in the moment. If we haven't processed our emotions, we're somewhere back here or somewhere out there, the past and the future. What's in the moment would be the grief, feeling that emotion. Yeah, it hurts, but it also sets us free. Also sets us free. And those emotions you can feel physically, whether you're neck strain, heaviness on your chest, in energy. So without a doubt, when you're caring for someone or supporting someone's needs, it doesn't even have to be death, does it? It could be someone that's just going through a hard time. We feel that. We feel that weight. We're empathetic beings, thank goodness. So our work is learning how to set the appropriately loving boundaries to be able to hold ourselves strong and centered and support and love. And learning compassion helps us with that. Learning how to be compassionate. I hope that was helpful, Roxanne. If there's something else that you'd like me to address, please feel free to chime in. You know, I am called to share just a couple more things about grief, if I might. It's such a huge topic, and every single one of us in the world is experiencing it right now, aren't we? It's the grief of the life we once lived, and we're now trying to piece together a new life, you know. Love and loss, as I shared, are intimate companions. When we lose someone we love, whether it's in a relationship or to death, there's a tear in the fabric of the universe. It's a scar that we feel for. The flaw you can't stop seeing. It's really a tender place that won't bear weight. A void, when we lose somebody, a void. As chaos, the universe tends towards order. So even though there is a rip, it gets camouflaged. The edges overlap over time. You might even forget that this is a spot where something went missing. The spot where if you push, you'll fall through. And then there's a then there's a scent or a thought or a heartbeat. And suddenly it's as clear as day. The light behind the ragged tear, so blinding, you can't even imagine how you ever mistakenly believed it had woven itself back together. You may move with your tears towards the gentle smile as you remember your love. Grief changes textures, grief changes feelings, grief changes weight, time and tears. Yeah. We all have felt it. It's one thing we share. Yeah. What else is on your mind? Oh, hi, Terry from Connecticut. Welcome. What brought you to the cafe today? You're welcome, Roxanne. I'm glad. I'm glad you're here for the first time. And Terry, if you're here for the first time, the Death Cafe is really a discussion, a forum. And if there's anything on your mind, happy to talk about it and share. Okay. Something brought you to the cafe. Curiosity got the cat, I'm sure, as well as there might be something on your mind. Oh, wonderful, Terry. You're starting a business in this field. Are you becoming an end-of-life practitioner? Or are you going to start a death cafe in your area? And let me know how I can support you. And how are you all doing? Hey, Emily from the Bay Area, welcome. How are you all doing moving through COVID? I don't think I can say enough about this time in our lives. And, you know, if you look back in time, in history, there's been many, many COVIDs around and beyond our time. I wonder how they coped with it. So much suffering and so many dying. Many are separated from their loved ones, kind of like a tsunami of intense stressors, at the same time removing our resources of coping. Millions of people have lost their jobs. Some have lost their homes. Many feel in the midst of challenging times. I'm sure I've left out 100 stressors. Yeah. What do you use to support yourself? Wonderful, Terry. You help people, you do death cafes and have helped people with their advanced directives. Beautiful. Beautiful. That's very noble. Beautiful. Is there anything on your mind tonight that you wanted to share, Terry? Susan, my heart is with you. Your father-in-law died from COVID. I don't think there's any words that can truly bring comfort when we've lost a loved one. An arm around someone, a love, some compassion, a listening ear. Those all help us move through our process. Yeah. We grieve. We grieve every day. If we're alive, we grieve. So one of the questions we might ask us is, how does grief serve our life? When does grief cross that line from being part of our process to overwhelming and taking over our lives? When are we not functioning? Remember, a client's son said, I'm really worried about my mom. She still has all my dad's clothes in her closet, and it's been over a year. And my response was, is she eating? Is she doing her daily activities? Is she connecting with people? He said, yeah. He said, yeah, but it's strange and it's weird for her to have this clothes. And they asked I asked why, and he said, well, he's dead. And I said, these are the remembrance for her, a way of connecting to him through the smells, through the touch. And if these things that bring us comfort aren't interfering with the life we wish to lead, aren't hurting us, then I don't think they do harm. Yeah. I have very special things from loved ones that have died. I have an Ancestor Altar, and I have my mom's hankies, and I smell them. I have my grandmother's facial powder, and they bring me close to her. Yeah, I know she's died. I know they're dead. But as I recall a client saying, my husband died, but I just have a new relationship with him. It's different, and one that I cherish and bring me comfort in my life. So there's so many ways to grieve. Susan, I wish you the support and love to carry you on, and may your father-in-law live on in your heart and continue to support your life. Terry, you were wondering how to get the word out on what you do. Well, I think there's lots of ways, and one would be to share on social media, of course, all that you do. Go to local organizations and share what you do. Create a brochure, a flyer, and information, and let people get to know you, that you're trusted, and that you have knowledge and background to help them with their end-of-life directives. And that the Death Cafe, as I hope it is for all of you tonight, is a wonderful place to have discussions and talk about questions and curiosities. I also would connect with your local hospices and end-of-life organizations that can help you get connected. If you don't have a website, to put a website up. And please send us your information so that we can also share it. We'd be happy to support you. You know, I often ponder this. I'm finishing writing an end-of-life practitioner training program that starts in October, and it's over a 400-page textbook, and it's 35 years put into this book, and all my love and my heart. And I come across perplexing questions, like, I'm going to be teaching end-of-life practitioners and death doulas, so how do I teach them? What do I teach them? How do I say this? And can you put it in a box? And the answer is no. The answer is no. Is that we can gain a lot of knowledge, which they will, I hope. You can gain some skills by practice, which we will. You can get some tools in your toolbox, whether it's advanced directives, end-of-life planning, death plan tools, intake documents, etc., etc. I won't bore you with that. But what makes an end-of-life practitioner successful? What it boils down to, here's the secret. What it boils down to is love. No, that's not just cheesy. It truly is. What's most important is how we show up. And I'm going to say this the first day of class, and those of you that are registered for the class, you're going to get to hear it again. And that is, you'll learn all these things, but the most important thing I hope you walk away with is learning how to get out of the way. Is learning how to show up and be present, fully present, hold space, and allow someone to express who they are. Yes, that's part of learning compassion. It's a skill, it's an art, it's an intuition. But there's no one way to die, as I shared up front. What people are really, really needing, your loved ones as well, is they're needing love. They're needing support. They're needing to feel like they're heard. And they want to feel like someone's holding their hand, whether it's literally or spiritually or emotionally. They're going through this alone. We die alone. And yet, when we have a little companion or someone by our side, we're going through tough times. It's everything. Think about those times in your life when you had somebody wrap their arm around you. It's the greatest feeling in the world. We are relational beings as humans. We want to be loved. We want to be nurtured. We want to be heard. We don't want to be told what to do. We want to be supported. And yeah, there's some education involved in that. There's some advocacy involved. But bottom line, that person that's dying in their families are really needing love and a gentle support for them to experience a death the way they wish, and to be able to learn how to support and love their loved ones through at the end of life. Yeah. Good. Well, this time always goes by. I see we have just a few seconds left, but I want to open it up. Is there any more questions or comments? I know we just brushed the surface on some of these topics. If there's anything else that comes up for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. And may you all, and if anything comes up, if you want to pop in another question, please do. May you all feel loved. May you all feel supported. Yeah. Sweet. I want to address this before I sign up. You're so welcome, Leslie. Thank you from Toronto. Take good care of you. The topic came up again in the chat about not being able to be with loved ones, especially when they have their cognitive ability has declined for sure. It is very, very, very difficult And we can't explain it, right? If we're not able to connect cognitively. The blessing is that most communication is not via words. It's nonverbal cues. So for someone that has cognitive decline, there's lots of things they can do in the hospital to bring them comfort. And by loving them, that's what they're going to feel. Letting them know they're okay no matter what. And they're being supported and loved and that you are near. You can look for it. I think it's on our Facebook page. It's called The Hands of God. In the hospital, the nurses were filling up gloves, surgical gloves, with warm water, tying them off and putting them in between the hands of the patient. You can only imagine just having that warm handhold. No words, just a warmth and sensation that moves through. So someone with cognitive decline, you're not going to be able to explain that you can't get in to see them. But you can work with the nursing staff. You can have them bring in things of comfort for them, things that you know will help them feel safe and feel loved. Maybe a nurse would be able to hold up an iPad and they can connect. You can connect that way. If you want some more information, just reach out. Good. Well, I'm sorry we're over, but thank you so much, everybody. And be well, be love, be you, and know that we care. My heart to yours. Take the best care of you. You've got this.